Hannah, and today I am here with a very, very special guest, the wonderful Victoria Schwab, one of my favorite authors of all time. We're here for her Vengeful tour at Tattered Cover Bookstore in Denver. Vengeful just recently came out. It is the sequel to Vicious, part of the Villains series, which is one of my favorite books ever, as you all know. So I'm so excited to read it. I still haven't read it.
Oh,
I know. And we're just going to be talking a bit and having a really fun time.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for being here with
It's
me.
my pleasure. We're in this very nookish environment right now in the basement of this bookstore.
Yes.
So I love it. I love it. Hopefully my words will make sense. I have been on tour for 6 days and I have many more to go, and I'm trying very best to be a human still.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit, for anyone who doesn't know, about the Villains series in general?
Of course. So the Villains series, originally with Vicious, came out 5 years ago, which is insane. And it is about 2 pre-med students, Victor and Eli, who discover the key to superpowers are near-death experiences. And so they set out to manufacture their own supernatural ability by controlling their own death and resurrection. And everything goes horribly, horribly wrong, which I feel like is the theme for most of my books, like info, and then something goes horribly, horribly wrong. It becomes a revenge narrative. It's set 10 years after that happens, mostly, when one of them is breaking out of prison for murder, and the other one has been on a decade-long killing spree of every superpowered person he can find. And it's about what happened between these two. And so Vengeful is a sequel. It's halfway between a sequel and a companion. Okay. It's definitely a continuation. Like, it takes place 5 years after Vicious, and the entire cast of Vicious is still present in it. But we also meet 2 new main characters, Marcella and June. And so I like to say that, and you'll probably hear me say this later, that if Vicious is a story of control, especially of 2 people trying to take control, Vengeful is the story of those 2 men losing control. But it's also the story of 2 women learning to take control in a world that has tried to strip them of that power repeatedly.
A common theme throughout a lot of your novels is like the dichotomy of good and evil.
Absolutely.
And you examine that a lot. I was going to ask you about why that's an important topic for you to look at in all of your books.
Yeah, I just don't think I believe in black and white in that way. For me, I think people, not characters, people exist in grays, in moral grays, and most of us have some self-serving nature as well as some altruism, and we have a lot of self-interest, we have ambition, and so I really like exploring characters who really model humanity's flaws as well as its strengths. I also think it's way more interesting to write people who have those weaknesses, and so a lot of what I'm exploring in my books is not just heroism and villainy, it's really the idea that when you give people power, you don't also give them a moral imperative to be good. And so with the characters in Vicious, they get immense power and they don't become superheroes because they just become people with power. And that happens in some iteration in most of my books. It happens with magic and Shades of Magic. It happens with monstrosity in the Monster Severity. I just like the idea that people don't change automatically for the better. In fact, most of us would change for the worse.
So you've talked a lot before about how part of your inspiration for Vicious, specifically Eli and Victor, came from Cowboy Bebop. So I was going to ask you, where do you get a lot of your inspiration, most of your inspiration for your books? Is it from TV, movies, personal experiences, or a combination of all this?
It's really hard. It's really piecemeal for me. I use a cooking analogy that I keep all my story ideas, they're in a pot on the back burner, and I'm adding ingredients to them until something happens and it coalesces to form a meal. So my inspiration can come from a piece of music, can come from the Archive series. One of the primary plot points came from a dance on So You Think You Can Dance, a routine that just hit me in a really specific way. I'm inspired as much by music and anime and art and books and television. I mean, I consume voraciously. So I consume books, but I also consume a lot of entertainment and media, and I'm kind of constantly looking for things which kind of scratch that creative itch. For while I was writing Vengeful, weirdly, it was the John Wick movies. They are done in a really specific color palette and style, and there was something about the fight scenes and the clean lines of the choreography and just the way it was executed that spoke to me. So it wasn't the plot necessarily, but it was every still frame. So there's something where every now and then I'll hear a song that it'll just become the song on repeat while I'm writing. I just try to find those immersive elements, and oftentimes they're so piecemeal that a reader wouldn't notice them. Every now and then I'll put in a fairly large nod to something that I love. So in City of Ghosts, there's a lot of Harry Potter nods.
Yeah.
Shades of Magic has a lot of Harry Potter Easter eggs because Shades of Magic was really born by Avatar: The Last Airbender and Harry Potter. That was like my love letter to those two things. And so there's a lot of little nods from Kel's Coat, which is my nod to the Room of Requirement, to obviously magic and the systems, but the elemental systems come from Avatar. So Cowboy Bebop is one of those bigger nods, definitely, in ways I didn't always like process until I was going back and reflecting on it. Like I didn't realize how large an inspiration Supernatural, the TV show, had been on the witty banter element and like the bromances and a lot of the non-romantic relationships until I went back and did a rewatch of it a couple years ago. So I don't always notice how specific a lot of my inspirations are. And most of the time, like you say, I'm cutting them down to such small increments that very few people would notice without my saying something.
I remember the first time you ever said, that I ever heard you say that Avatar: The Last Airbender was one of your inspirations because it's my favorite show of all time. Yeah, for the Shades of Magic series. So then when I read it, I was like, I see this, and I love it so much.
And I definitely feel like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is gonna have had a lot of influence on Threads of Power on the follow-up because I hadn't actually watched it when I was writing Shades of Magic, but I've since watched it, and I feel like I would retroactively claim that as like that would have been a third influence as well. They all fit of a piece in terms of magical systems and the intersection of magic and structure and magic and order. So we'll see how much Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood kind of weaves its way into Threads of Power.
I will be looking for those because I've watched it since then too, and I hadn't watched it before. It's like my favorite thing.
Yeah,
in the world
it left
now.
a hole in my heart.
Oh yeah, me too.
So
you have a very distinct aesthetic when it comes to like your stories, and it's evident in the covers of the books.
I mean, I'm also like wearing, I am red, white, gray, and black.
Yes, exactly. So this is, and I feel like it also translates into like your works as well.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask if that was something that was intentional for you, or did it just come organically with your stories?
I think to a degree it was organic, and then it became intentional. So like now when City of Ghosts came out, my middle grade, they were very aware of the existing color palette of all of my book covers, and they weren't going to go with like a blue-green color palette. They wanted it to fit. It actually started with my UK covers. My UK cover of Vicious was red and white and highly graphic, and then when they did a darker shade of magic, it was also red and white, and then US did a red and white, a darker shade magic, and then as the series kind of blossomed, it became really apparent that I had this color theme happening, and we liked it. Like it worked. The spine's out. You can tell which ones are my books in the science fiction and fantasy section because they have their color palette. It was really like a nice stylistic echo with the plot and the content of the books, and it also helps that I literally exist in these 4 colors. I precede my books, and so I existed in the 4 colors before my books did. I don't know, they're my 4 favorite colors, and I think that it's just kind of evolved into almost like every one of my events on tour so far, the majority of the audience has worn those colors as well, and I love that. It's such a specific kind of fandom. Yeah, but I've never forced it. It's never been one of those things where like, oh no, I'm gonna have to shift something about either my aesthetic or the plot of a book. It's just always been kind of natural.
So you're very, very transparent on your social media about your writing process, and especially how difficult that process can be sometimes because writing is hard.
It is.
And I feel like a lot of people don't talk about it. Why is it so important for you to share that part of your writing process with your audience?
I think writing is lonely. Like writing is 98% solitary. So, and even as a professional author, writing is 95% solitary, and then the other 5% is highly public. It's me touring, it's me promoting, and but really it's such a lonely process. And I think that loneliness is most dangerous because when you're struggling, when you're having a hard time writing that draft or doing that revision, if nobody else articulates that they're struggling, it can feel like a qualitative assessment. So it can feel like you're struggling because you're not a good enough writer, instead of you're struggling because writing is hard. And so one of the reasons I'm so transparent is so that aspiring writers and my colleagues know that they're not alone in whatever they're currently fighting with. And I do get a huge number of aspiring writers who come up to me at events and say thank you, because like it's really easy to think you're the only one that sucks. And the fact is, like, we all have to suck. You have to write a thing wrong before you ever get to write it right. And that means that you're going to have to do it badly. I mean, every single one of my books, and I'm on book number 16 now, I've had to write it wrong before I could write it right. I wish I had seen more transparency when I got into this. I got into this really young. I was 19. I'm now 31, so I've been in this for a little while, but I got into it and nobody was talking about it, and still most people don't talk about it. Now it's a little trendy, and I'm glad for that in some ways. I think we have to work on like what is transparency and what makes people feel worse instead of better. There's definitely some fine lines, and that's why I don't stand up there and talk about money and talk about exact numbers, but what I do is talk about how difficult the creative process is. And I'll talk about what I struggle with. I'm never going to be prescriptive about it. I'm never going to say, here's what you should do. I can only talk about my own creative experience. And that experience is admittedly messier than some other people. Some other people's are just like, I love my job, writing is the best, and if you don't love it, you shouldn't do it. And I'm like, that's not fair. I love my job too, and I love the satisfaction I get from it, but I've always had a pretty like self-abusive creative process, and that I feel pretty inadequate to the task most of the time. And I'm really lucky that I've cultivated a community that can remind me that like, hey, you've done this before, you can do this again, because I need reminding too. And so in part I talk about it to remind myself that I'm not the only one struggling, and in part I talk about it to help authors who might be a few steps behind me on the journey realize that one, that's never going to go away, and if they don't think they can get past that, maybe publishing is not for them, because like it never gets easier. If anything, it gets harder with the more voices around you. But also just to know that like if you're struggling through a draft or a revision or any part of this process, like you are definitely not alone in that fight.
Now I just have a couple of fun questions.
Yes, please.
So I know I asked you this question last time, and I know you get this question all the time.
Go ahead.
But can you sort the Villains series characters into Hogwarts House?
Someone just asked me this online because I think it's really funny, because they're all Slytherins. Like Mitch is a Hufflepuff.
Okay.
But every other character is Slytherin, and there's a reason for that, and that's because when I was pitching it, I said that that Victor and Eli, that the pre-med students discover the key to superpowers are near-death experiences. That's the quantitative factor. That's the thing you can measure, but there's also something else. Not everybody who has a near-death experience in this world comes back with a superpower. There's that experience, and then there's something inside of them. There's something about their personality. Someone mentioned online, they're like, it does seem like there's an awful lot of sociopaths and psychopaths. And I said, yeah, exactly. Like it's an absolute selfish need to exist, to survive, a compulsion and a will. And I find that level of single-mindedness that seems to bring these characters back from the edge of death is a very Slytherin trait. So it's a very self-serving, and it's a very ambitious, and it's a very particular kind of psychological profile. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, almost every EO in this series, almost every extraordinary, the name for the ones that have superpowers, is a Slytherin.
Then my last question.
Yes.
If you were to take like each of your series, and if each of them were to be able to be adapted on screen, would you like them to be like a live action TV show, animated, or a movie?
Oh, that's so hard. For Vicious and Vengeful, I think I'd really like it to be a television series, because I think it would be very hard to do justice to this ensemble cast in a film. Darker Shade of Magic is currently in the works for live action, but I would also really ridiculously love to see it as an anime. Like I think it would be perfect as an anime.
Especially with the comics.
Exactly, exactly. So we'll see, it's a constantly amorphous process. City of Ghosts, I think probably TV show, just because it's like an episodic adventure style thing. And Monsters of Verity, I think I'd like to see as a movie as well. I think that it's like, I used to describe it as Sin City in that kind of color palette and style, and I think it would be really good as a film.
So that is it for all of my questions. Thank you so much to Victoria for being here, for answering my questions, and taking the time out of your busy, busy day.
Yeah, hopefully it makes sense right now. It's like say it's day 6, you guys.
Vengeful is out now. You can go and pick it up. And all of Victoria's other books, which are all fantastic, wonderful, highly recommend. You know how much I love them and talk about them. But yeah, once again, thank you all so much for watching this video. Thank you to Victoria for being here, and I will see you all in my next video.
Thank you.
Bye!